Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Leap. Thank you all so much for coming and being here during our February series, which is on grief and loss. And all of my guests have lost a sibling. For those listeners, you know that I lost my brother in February 14th of 2014 and spent the next 3.5 years writing a book specific to sibling loss. This guest is so special to me. And so I want to take a moment before I hand the mic over and give you a little backstory on how I know Aimee McKee. She reached out to me when she saw a Facebook post about my book and asked me where she could buy it. And of course, the book had not come out yet. So I sent her the PDF of the book and asked her if she would read it in exchange to give me an honest review of what she thought. And from there, our relationship just bloomed. And Aimee's mom bought her an airline ticket. Aimee is from Ireland. That's a very important piece of the story. Her a ticket to Maine so that she could be here for the book launch, which came out in February 14th of 2020. And so she has become really like a daughter to me. And I love her so deeply. And it is a deep honor of mine that she is with us here today to share her story with all of you. So I want to welcome Aimee to the show. Thank you so much for being here. So can you introduce yourself to our listeners? Just a little bit about you, your age, where you're going to university, where you live, anything you'd like to share before we jump into the story of you and your brother, Mark.
Yes, so I'm Aimee, I'm 23 and I live in Belfast in Northern Ireland. My brother died when I was 18 in May 2017, just the year before I moved to Glasgow for university to study psychology. And then I'd been to like all of these different types of counsellors, and at one point one of them was like, well, what can I do? Like, what can I help you with? And I was like, I really want a good book. I didn't mean like a counselling book, I just meant like a normal book, like Jacqueline Wilson would have done it. And she sent me home with like 15 grief books. And I thought, oh, no, not for me, not doing it. I thought, right, well, there's a reason she sent me home with these. Like, some people must get benefit from them. I got nothing from any of them. And they were all written by these people who didn't seem to have any experience in grief or the journey. And it was all people who kind of telling you how you should feel at a certain time, and just wasn't really working. And I thought, right, well, I'll see if I can find one myself. So I did a couple of searches and came across your book. There was like an excerpt of the book on the page. And I thought, right, where's the rest of this? And it hadn't been released yet. So that was stage one of me being really difficult. And yeah, that was it. The rest is kind of history.
Oh, I'm so glad that you reached out to me, because I know that having you in my life has changed it for the better. So let's move into your journey then. I want you to talk about who Mark was. So talk to us about your brother.
So my brother was 13 years older than me. So he was 31 when he died. And he died 2 days before his birthday. So he would have turned 32 on the Sunday and he died on the Friday. He was a chef in a really popular hotel here. He loved music. He DJ'd at a couple of big events, things like that, just lived for music. He had a son, my nephew, who is 10 now. He's very big. That's really it. I was very close. He lived with us. So he had moved out and then moved home again. So we were at that stage where, you always fight with your siblings, and then you kind of reach a certain age and you realise they're not as bad as you'd kind of thought your whole life. We just started to kind of get on. We used to fight with each other, then we fought with everyone else for each other. We were kind of at that point.
Tell us what happened to your brother.
Yeah, so my brother, on my last day of school, I was just finishing secondary school. It was my last ever day, and I had went out with a couple of friends. And when I looked at my phone and I had all these missed calls, and it was like 4 missed calls from my mum and 3 from my aunt and 16 from these people I don't really speak to. And so I rang them back and they were all, okay, you need to go home. No one would tell me why. And I was like, right, okay. So I got home and my aunt had met me at the bottom of my street, and she was like, okay, listen, before you go into your house, the police are there, the doctors are there, the ambulance is there, but Mark has died. But it was like, you know, in my head I was saying what, but in my body was like collapsing. And I remember being on the ground, and at the time, like, looking back, I'm like, oh, that's so dramatic. And then I go, no, it wasn't dramatic, but I just can't believe I was crawling the floor of my street. And so I came up, and right enough, the ambulance were there, the paramedics, the police, the doctors, everyone. And my brother was in his room on a mattress on the floor where my mum had tried to resuscitate him. And we didn't find out for about a year what happened. And they sent his death certificate back with no known cause on it, and didn't know what it was. No one had any idea. And, you know, there were a lot of rumours. We live in quite a small place, so everyone kind of knows everything that goes on. There were so many rumours, been like, you know, he died of drugs, he died from this, he died from that. And my brother had quite a bit of weight on him, so he'd lost a lot of weight very quickly. And there were a lot of rumours that it was, you know, fat burners or steroids or anything like that that had kind of triggered his heart to give in or whatever. And we kind of just ignored them for the year. We didn't know. The doctors had said that wasn't what it was. They ruled out suicide right away. So we weren't sure. And then, well, I got a letter from the hospital saying that they were going to send for me for like heart tests in the cardiac clinic. My mum had to go as well.
And this was a year after your brother died?
So he died in the May, and then we didn't go for the tests until the following October, November time.
Did you know at this point that your brother died of a heart condition?
No, with no idea. So none whatsoever. They didn't say it was anything to do with the heart. They didn't say anything like that. They just said, I don't know what happened. We have done every test we can. The coroner had done all the tests, and they had no idea what was happening. They just kind of left it and said, unascertained, that's it, done, we don't know. And then the hospital, somehow, I don't know why, but the hospital decided, okay, we're going to run a couple of tests. So they had sent for me and my mum, and they done all these tests. It was like treadmill tests, all these 24-hour heart monitors that you had to wear, you know, all the wires, loads and loads of different tests. And eventually they came back and they said, maybe 6 months later, they sent for us again. You know, my mum is a smoker, like she would have suffered badly with heart palpitations at the time. So, you know, we knew obviously at the time they were testing for a heart condition, otherwise we wouldn't have been at the cardiac clinic. I didn't really expect that I was going to have anything because, you know, I've been kickboxing for 14 years. You'd think something would have told by now. Nothing, absolutely nothing. There was no idea in my head. And then they sent my mum down. They said, okay, so what we've done is we've compared your cells. Okay, you have a heart condition called long QT syndrome. My mum went, right. They said, Aimee, you also have this heart condition. And I was like, right, okay, that was a double blow. And then they went, we've compared both of your cells with the cells that the coroner had left from Mark, because he was cremated, so they just were able to take a couple of cells just to keep, just in case. And they took the cells from the coroner and compared them with ours and found that he had that. So they kind of ruled, okay, well, that's what happened. He had this heart condition.
So can you tell us again, what's the heart condition?
Yeah, you know what? I would tell you if I knew myself. I don't have a clue. It's called long QT syndrome, and it's basically when, so your heart waves kind of go like this, and they're called your PQRST wave. Each of your waves has a letter, and basically the distance between our Q wave and our T wave is too long, so it can kind of go like this before it starts again, and sometimes certain events can cause your heart just to flatline, and your heart won't restart again.
That's what happened to your brother.
Yeah, well, he had come home from the gym or from work or wherever he was and went to bed for a couple of hours, and then whenever my mum found him, he was lying half on the bed, half off the bed, as if he'd kind of stood up and then just fallen. And my mum originally thought he was joking and was like, right, Mark, come on, you need to get up. And no, it did. So there are some triggers for it. It can be, so I'm not allowed an alarm clock anymore for my phone. I have to use, I mean, I still use it, I probably shouldn't. They tried to get me to use a smart bulb so I can set it for, like, for example, 6 o'clock in the morning, and it'll wake me naturally with the light, because the sudden noises can trigger arrhythmias in your heart, which they assume is what happened to him. So, yeah, it was such a shock. It was kind of one thing after the other for such a long period of time. It was just one thing after another.
Right, because you've lost your brother. You don't know why. He's so young. Then you find out why. And then you find out that you're also at risk. You're juggling two huge, and not to mention now the fear that your mother must also be living with.
Yeah, it was more, for me, I think personally, it was more of, this is going to come across wrong. Not that I didn't care what happened. Of course I cared. But I had just resigned myself to the fact that I was never going to find out. Because, you know, they give you a death certificate. You don't expect them to come back a year and a half later and say, okay, actually, we've changed our minds. This is what happened. So I was kind of just coming to terms with the fact that we were never going to find out what happened, whereas my mum was kind of holding on to something where she just really wanted to find out what happened to her child. Whereas I was kind of like, oh, it's okay, like, let's leave it. Let's just, he's dead. No matter whether we find out what happened or not, he's not going to come back. So, it doesn't really matter. And then obviously there's this whole thing with, a year and a half later, they tell you what happened and then they go, okay, so what killed your brother? You have it too. And you're going, whoa, okay, stop the roller coaster. I want off now. It was all a lot at once. And it was a whole, learning to change. For me, it was, having to adjust my lifestyle to this new health condition that I'd never had before, but also learning to adjust with being an only child and, a grieving mother. And it was all just a lot stemming from one place.
Yeah, a lot. So talk to us, Aimee, about that process. I know a little bit about it. I mean, I know your personality, and you are this energetic, happy-go-lucky human being, and grief has a way to sneak up on us. Nobody likes to grieve, right? Grieving's hard. I mean, it sucks. Let's face it. It is the worst. And now you also have this fear of your own health on top of it. Talk to us as openly as you're comfortable with of how you managed all of these really big emotional things that were going on in your life, when really you were at a point where you should have been like happy-go-lucky in college and like doing the free thing, but that was not your reality. How did you deal with it all? What did you do to help yourself maneuver through this labyrinth of such complex, competing emotions that were happening, and also trying to deal with a grieving mother?
Originally, I didn't really do anything. And I went about my normal life, which, at the time was great for me because I don't like disruption. I like to go about my life with no one bothering me and everyone just to leave me alone, which isn't really realistic when things like that happen. But I genuinely didn't do anything. Mark died on the Friday in my A-level exams. So like my exams that I sit before I go to university to kind of determine what university I'm going to get into, they were the following week. Yeah, like the end of the week after and then the start of the week after that. So he died on the Friday and I went back to school on the Monday and went back to school and went to class, and my teachers were kind of plucking me from class and being like, why are you here? I've got things to do. I've got exams to sit. And I knew that it would have made it harder for me the following year if I was going to have to sit 3 exams rather than sitting in that year. I just kind of went about my life. I kind of not ignored it. Obviously I cried and I had breakdowns every couple of days. And, after the funeral, I went through waves. It kind of just ebbed and flowed. I woke up. Even to this day, I'm probably still like that. Like I'll have really long periods of time where I'm absolutely fine. And I'll talk about it, no problem, and everything's fine. And I think everything's fine and dandy. And then I get up in the morning and I'm going, oh shit, maybe not going to be so fine today. But it is just moments for me. But at the time, I ignored it for so long. I did such a good job of ignoring it for so long. And then it just kind of eventually creeped up behind me. I don't know why I'm laughing because it's absolutely horrific.
So let's stop there because I want to talk about the way grief can creep up on us. And when you say it creeped up on you, I always say that in grief, we hit a wall at 4 months. It's been my experience, not just my personal experience, but in talking to others. So how long were you able to keep that? I call it the grief demon. How long were you able to tamp down that grief demon before it reared its ugly head in your world?
Oh, I did more than 4 months. I did so well. I kept it at bay for quite a while. It genuinely didn't hit me until, I think you'll probably remember this, until I was at uni. I was in my second year of uni, which was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, just before COVID, because I thought I had done the work. I thought I had done everything that I had to do. I was going to counselling because I was told that I was supposed to go, because I thought, okay, this will help me. I was upset 2 days ago, so I'll go to counselling and I'll talk about it. And I went and I was sitting in front of this lovely woman who was going, okay, so how are you? And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay, thanks. How are you? Like, what did you do today? And she was like, are you sure you're okay? And I'm like, yeah, is there something you want to talk to me about? Like, are you okay? Like, I didn't know. That was what was more difficult for me, because I didn't have access to the help when I needed it, because it was kind of, everyone expects you, okay, so someone's died, you're going to be a mess for the next 4 months. Do all the work. And I'm like, I didn't need it then. Of course I was upset, but I think I did such a good job of pushing it to the bottom subconsciously that I just couldn't grieve. I went through days where I was upset, but I functioned, and I had a cry for an hour and then I brushed it off and I went about my business, and I did that so well that I just woke up one morning and was like, nah, no, it's not working anymore. And I didn't know what was wrong. I think I remember telling you, I don't know what's
Yes.
wrong. I was like, I'm so upset all the time. If someone looks at me the wrong way, I cry. I'm so angry all the time. I can't do any work. I can't sleep. Then I'm sleeping too much. And everything's just going on. I just couldn't cope anymore. And I remember going to the counsellor at uni, and she was like, okay, so has anything big happened to make you upset? And I was like, no. And she says, okay, well, talk me through the past couple of years. And I told her that, and she kind of looked at me as if to say, are you joking? Like, no big events have happened. You don't know why you're upset, but you've just told me that your brother died and you have this new diagnosed heart condition that killed your brother. And I was like, that was a year and a half ago. And it took me such a long time to realize that it doesn't have to affect you immediately for it to affect you at all. And that was probably one of the things that I struggled with the most, because I kind of felt almost as if I was being ridiculous a year and a half later, going, well, what right do I have to be grieving now or to be upset now when I should have done this a year and a half ago? Because there's also some kind of, it's not a stigma, of course it's not a stigma, but it's, for to sit down to one of your friends and say, oh, well, all of this happened a year and a half ago and I'm really upset, but up until then they've never seen you upset about it. It's a bit confusing. It's confusing probably as much for me as it was for them, but I had to just stick through it and I just had to ride the wave. Yeah, it was interesting.
And I really thank you for just being so eloquent in talking about how grief has no clocks, it has no calendars, there is no timeline. And, I had interviewed people for my book, and there was one woman, her brother died at 17, and she didn't start dealing with it until she was in her 40s. And I think that it is confusing. And I appreciate that you say that as well, because I think what happens after 2 weeks after somebody has passed, you get all of this support and people move on. They don't do it in a malicious way. They don't do it because they don't care. They do it because life moves on. And that's just the way life works. But for those who are grieving, depending on when it hits us, because I always say people can tamp it down for a long period of time, but it will manifest in some way.
And I was like, no, it's okay. I was like, Susan, I think you were right. I think it's happening.
And all of a sudden it's an avalanche. And for some people, they never recognize it as grief. It can come out as anger. Like you said, you felt angry. It can come out a lot of different ways. But I can promise you, listeners, it will come out. Maybe you won't shed a tear. Maybe you'll never recognize it. Maybe it shows up as an illness in your body. But grief has to go somewhere, because when we love people in our life, that is a gift. The other side of that coin is when we lose them, we grieve, and that grief has to go somewhere. So it's either going to be external or it's going to be internal. There's this beautiful saying that grief is love with no place to go. And I remember when you were going through that, and I think I remember saying you're grieving, Aimee.
And I don't know what's wrong with me. I think I'm just tired. But no, you make a really good point when you said that, people move on after a couple of weeks. And I think it brings so much comfort when someone initially dies, because, all these people are there who love them and who care for them and who have all these memories, and you think you're all kind of going to just stay like that forever. And then you see, for example, like my brother's friends start to go back out to places where they would have went together only without him. And, they're posting photos of their friends and he's not there, or things like that. And it's just like, you're missing someone. Like, there's someone missing in that photo. How can you post that photo? And I think that's where like a lot of my anger started to come from. Before I got to that stage where I just couldn't really hold it in anymore, I went through a lot of, I know they say that grief comes in like stages, but it really does come in stages, to the point where sometimes it's even hard to recognize that that's what it is. Like, I went through a really angry / I don't know if it was jealousy. It was really bizarre because I'm not really a jealous person. I remember one day going out with one of my friends. There was a couple of us and they were going back to my house, and we went and their brother was there. I couldn't deal with it. I was like, I can't watch you and your brother just, muck about and have fun. I just couldn't do it. Even now I'm fine with it. But I remember at that time going, I'm going to have to deal with that, because I can't go through the rest of my life not being able to look at someone's brother. It's the most bizarre thing.
And yet it's not bizarre at all, right? Because when our loss is in our face, we have to face it, right? Mm-hmm. And when something is reflected back that we are not ready to deal with or that we're in the middle of, it is an honoring of that feeling. I mean, think about women who are pregnant and have a miscarriage and see pregnant women. It brings
Yeah.
it back over and over again. And I think the other thing I want to talk about, because as you know, Aimee, I have done a lot of interviews around how sibling loss is not talked about enough. People don't understand how deep that loss is, because when a sibling loses a brother or a sister, suddenly the entire world feels like we've got to be strong for our parents. And if our sibling was old enough to have a family, a spouse and children of their own, the sibling keeps getting the reinforced message of being strong for everyone. And meanwhile, we are swallowing back our grief. We are trying to be strong. And yet, there is no bond like a sibling bond. Even if you're estranged from your sibling, no one knows you like your siblings do. So, talk to us about how you also had to manage being present to your mother's grief and what that was like. Because your father also died in a very tragic way.
Yeah, so it's kind of, now it's just my mum and I. Yeah, it was definitely interesting. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, because at the time you feel so guilty for everything, whereas now I'm like, that was just kind of one of the stages. But definitely, like, I remember maybe a couple of weeks after Mark had died, and I'd started to kind of bump into people. People would have avoided me for a while because they didn't know what to say. And I know that myself, when you see someone in someone's past, you don't know what to say, and you're like, oh, how do I go about this? But people genuinely were avoiding me in the street. And, people who didn't avoid me were going, how's your mum? Is your mum
Right.
okay?
Yes.
And I was like, yeah, I mean,
she lost her son.
Yeah, she's breathing, she's alive. And then it was Caleb okay, my nephew, who was maybe 6 at the time. And I was like, yeah, he's okay, he's a child. It's awful, but, he'll adjust. He's okay. He's dealing. Conversation done.
Hey, Aimee, how are you doing now that you've lost your only sibling?
Okay too, by the way. Thanks for asking. It was more of a, okay, your mum has lost a child. Your nephew has lost a parent. I hope you're being there for them. And I was like, right, okay. And, it was never explicitly said, but no one ever really asked, except for my friends who were kind of prioritize me. But whenever it's people who are kind of outside and have an outsider's perspective, they never really think, which was a really interesting, I think, probably one of my favorite things about your book, because it really brought that to light, especially at the time when it's so hard to adequately string together your thoughts in your head because everything's so jumbled. I think that when I read your book, that was one of the things I loved the most, because it kind of put everything into perspective and helped me kind of understand how I was feeling myself before I even knew how I was feeling. I remember as well one day being in a taxi who knew my mum years ago, and he'd asked, what I was doing. I was like, oh, I'm getting ready to go to uni, and I was obviously moving to Scotland, which is only like a 25-minute flight, but it's a flight nonetheless. And he was like, and he looked at me and he went, how can you do that to your mum? And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, well, I mean, she's just lost a son. Do you not think that's enough without you moving away too? Like, do you not think that's a bit wrong? And I remember being like, oh my goodness. And I'm saying, well, no, because I have a life to live too. And, what am I going to do? Just stay here forever? And I spoke to my mum about it a couple of weeks later, and she was like, I'm fine. And obviously she wasn't fine, but she would have been more angry at me for staying than she would have been for me to go. Like, of course, she was upset when I left, but she knew I had a life to live and that I had things I wanted to do that I had to do for me. As selfish as it sounds, I know it's not selfish, but it feels selfish at the time. But it was definitely interesting. It's also a sense of responsibility that you kind of inflict upon yourself that no one ever really says, and your mum doesn't say it, but it's kind of something that you kind of just automatically assume that, okay, so it's just the two of us now, so I kind of have a lot to deal with. But not as in, oh, I can't deal with this, but it's a lot of responsibility that no one ever really gives you and that you never really sign up for. It's kind of making sure that she's never really on her own for too long, initially anyway, making sure she's always with someone, or, feeling guilty for going out for too long, which she obviously would have been really annoyed at the time if she had thought that that's the way I was thinking. But it's a sense of, I'm kind of who she has now. I have to step up, meanwhile still trying to deal with whatever I'm going through.
I remember you and I talking about this, that your mom also went through a pretty angry period, right? I mean, because grief is so messy. There is nothing about it that is not messy. And so often we don't know to name it grief. So it comes out sideways and it's brutal. And in the natural order of things, parents say, my child is not supposed to die before me. But of course, we know it
Yeah.
happens all the time that children
Mhm.
can die before their parents.
Yeah.
So talk to us about how you and your mom, did you talk about it? Was it something that was not spoken about? Like, what did that white elephant look like in the room between you and your mom?
Oh. Yeah, do you know, I forgot all about this phase until you just said that. I couldn't talk about it with her. I could talk about the fact that, if it was about a time when Mark was alive, of course I'll talk about it. But very subconsciously, I could not. The minute she got upset, I couldn't deal with it. I had to change the subject. I couldn't. I actually think at one point I described it to you as like some kind of armadillo. It just jumps into a shell and just rolls away. I just couldn't cope. It was like, I just still don't know what it was. I think it was maybe something to do with the fact that, I think when you're younger, for me personally, no matter what happened, it's always your parents or your mum is like this like one person in your life who knows how to fix everything, who is kind of like just stability, like personified as just stability. And no matter what goes wrong in your life, it's okay because your mum's not upset, and everything's okay because she's fine. And if she's not worried about it, then why should you be? And everything's going to be okay. And then all of a sudden, there's this big thing that happens in your life, and it's such a big thing. And your mum's also having a really tough time dealing with it, and she's grieving so badly. And that you kind of go, this isn't okay. Like, it's not going to be okay because like everyone's upset, including the one person who you never see upset. And it was so uncomfortable for me. Like, of course I expected her to be upset. Of course she was going to cry, and of course she was going to grieve, but it's just something that you're just never prepared for. And my mum went to Cruise. I don't know if you have Cruise in America. It's like a bereavement counselling.
For many years, I ran bereavement groups at the Center for Grieving Children. So we do have places where there are groups where people can go to get bereavement support.
Okay. And it's kind of that, but we have like a main one, not your main isn't like the center one where everyone's kind of referred to. It's like you're referred through your doctor, and the waiting list is so long. So she waited months to go. But I think she went at quite a good time because she was kind of at the stage where she was still obviously heartbroken, but she was able to talk about it, which I think was perfect timing, because if you can't talk about it, then there's not much use you're going to get from it.
So she waited for months to get into this grief support group. Was it a group or a one-on-one?
No, it's a one-on-one. So originally I think she didn't want to go. Not to counseling's never been for her, but she's never been to a counsellor. I don't think she really knew what to expect or how it was going to help her, or where I've had more counsellors than hot dinners, and I think I've liked two of them. I was kind of going, okay, I don't like this one. This one was rubbish. So like I remember sitting in front of a counsellor one day. This is something that's really important, because so many people that I know have sat down and have went to counselling and have come out and went, not for me, didn't like it, not going back. And I'm going, no, but it is for you. Like, you're just not giving it a chance. I only learned that because I had a counsellor who I really liked to begin with. So I knew that when I'd left her to go to Glasgow and I got this other counsellor that I didn't like, I was like, well, it can't be the counselling that's not for me, because I really got a lot from it at home. So it must be this individual counsellor. Lovely woman, just wasn't for me. So I had to say, listen, I really appreciate this, but I don't feel like you're the particular counsellor for me. Like, is there any way I could go to someone else? And I did, and we got on great, and it really helped. But I think that's so important, and I'm so glad that when my mum went to Cruise that she got someone who she really enjoyed talking to, luckily, because she's so stubborn and she would not have gone back, and she would not have went back for love nor money, could not have forced her. But she really enjoyed it, and she stayed for a couple of extra weeks, and she came out of it. She felt an awful lot better having spoken about it. So she did that, and it was definitely a case of we grieved at different times. In terms of, when she was going through her angry phase, I was kind of just floating about, and vice versa, which is great in the sense that we weren't both angry at the same time. But also when I'm kind of floating and trying to just do what I can do and get about my day, and she's so angry at everything, or vice versa, and she's kind of having a good day and I come in and I'm storming about. It's not easy for the other one. So I think it's very easy to forget that people grieve at different times.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things I want to say about that, because so many things that you said are so powerful. So I want to go back to, when we bear witness to our parents' grief, they're like our rock. And it's sort of like when our rock melts under the sun, we have no idea what to do, because suddenly we feel like we're doing this reversal of roles and we've got to be strong for our parents. And so what I'll say about that's really a misnomer, that grief is a solo journey, and we can also have companions in our grief. And I think that one thing that I learned about the Center for Grieving Children is that our parents want to talk about their child.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, because I think one of the things that we carry as the child is it's so painful to watch our parents grieve, and trying to hold that grief is they're not
Mhm.
asking us to. And that we have this belief that, oh my God, if I bring up my sibling's name, I'm going to just create more pain for my parents. And
Yeah.
so I remember learning at the center that that in fact was not true. And that when I talked to my dad about it, the one thing he said was, I want to talk about Rocky anytime anyone will give me the space to. And it was like this wave
Mhm.
of relief off my shoulders
Yeah.
that it's okay to bring it up. It's okay to cry. It's not like when we bring up our sibling's name, we're reminding our parents that they died, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that is so silly when we say that out loud. And something else that you said that's also really poignant is our journey looks very different. We are not on this chronological timeline. You talk about the stages of grief. Those stages are not linear. They're all over the place. You can feel sad, you can feel angry, and it comes in waves. I mean, my brother, it'll be 8 years, which I still cannot believe, on February 14th. And I think about my brother every single day. I talk to my brother every single day. I don't have the acute grief where I break down into tears, but he is with me. My mom died almost 3 years ago. You don't get over the person that you've lost. I think that what we do, the best way I can put it into language, is that we move forward in our life with the spirit of that person, and we weave grief into the tapestry of our life. Our life is never the same. It can't be, because that person is gone. But what I think that we can do when we really do that hard work is it changes us in a way for the better, if that makes sense. I think it can deepen our compassion.
For a while, I cried at everything. Like, oh my goodness, it was not okay. I don't know if you have like soap operas there, like EastEnders. Oh my god, I cried at EastEnders. It was ridiculous. I cried at everything. Things that weren't even sad, things that weren't emotional. I cried. I went through a phase where I didn't cry at all. You could have hit me a punch right here, not a tear. There was nothing getting in there. But I think it made me a lot more compassionate. Whereas my mum, for a while, was very much like, no, I think she's processed it, and obviously she's still heartbroken, but like you say, you never get over it. But there was a time where she went through, a phase of seeing people Mark's age in the street, and she was like, how come they get to walk about there and breathe, and Mark didn't. Mark never harmed anyone. I remember looking at her and going, can't say that, like that's not nice. And then 2 months later it was me saying it. So it is just like a case of you feel how you feel and you can't help it. You just kind of have to go with it.
And so, something else you said, because I want to bring us full circle, because I know we're coming at the top of the hour, but I think the piece you said about counseling is really, really important. Of course, counseling is not for everyone, but I know that a theme that came up for people that I interviewed for the book, a lot of people had a really horrible experience when they tried to go to a grief counselor. And
Hmm.
and I think that, like I said, counseling's not for everybody. Sometimes people do really well in group work, sometimes they don't, sometimes it's one-on-one. But please, guys, if you have an experience with a counselor and you don't click, it's not counseling. It may be the counselor, as Aimee said, and to give it another whirl. That's what I'll say
Yeah.
to that. But I want to know where you are now, because I know you keep your brother's spirit alive with your nephew. And so talk to us about where you are now with the loss of your brother.
It's a very loaded question. I don't know, to be honest. I don't really place much importance on anniversaries or birthdays are different because you celebrate birthdays every year, whether they're alive or not. These don't really hold much importance for me simply because, again, like I've said before, I can't like this whole idea of I'm supposed to be sad on a certain day. I just can't, like, I can't force it. If I'm not sad on the anniversary, it's just a normal day. So I kind of just I think about my brother every day, and his room's still in the house. So, of course, I remember him. I've got loads of photos everywhere. I joke with my mum all the time because there are so many photos of him in the living room. I tell her it's like a shrine. And she's like, no, it's not. I talk about him all the time. My friends are at the point now where they're not afraid to ask about it. They used to kind of avoid asking questions in case they upset me, and then they kind of got to know. Now they just ask. If they want to know a question, they ask. people aren't really afraid of upsetting me anymore, and I think I'm okay. I'm nearly afraid to say I've grieved in case I have another episode, because that's not great. I think I've grieved. I think I've processed it, and I do think that sometimes I do still bury it to the bottom. Of course, there are still going to be days when I'm upset and when I feel it more than others, but I do think that it's just a case of, like, for me, a big, massive takeaway for me, especially, like, this won't apply to everyone, but especially in the circumstances of my brother's death, was just like, life is so short. And I took, like, that was such a big takeaway for me, because I'm such a complainer. I just love to listen to myself complain sometimes. I do think that was such an important thing for me, because I'm like, well, what am I complaining about? I have this heart condition that I didn't know about for 18, 19 years. And I'm lucky enough to still be walking about and breathing and having all the opportunities that I have. My brother didn't get to have. And I think it's all about your perspective. Now that I think I've been through the process, because I can either look at it and be angry and be upset, or I can say, well, okay, I can kind of take the opportunities that he didn't get to have, and just kind of, when I do things, I kind of do it for him, because he never got to do it, and just live every day as I can, because you never know what's going to happen. And I think for me, that was such, like, it sounds really morbid, but it was such a positive thing for me. Not his death, obviously, but the fact that, I got the shift in perspective was such a big thing for me. I don't know if we're ever really done grieving. I say I've grieved. I don't think we're ever really done grieving. Like, it lasts as long as it lasts. It might last forever, but I think I understand and I've processed. And, in 10 years' time, if I decide I want to go back to a counsellor, then I'm not going to be angry at myself about it like I was whenever I first had to go, because it's just the process, and, you just have to be kind about it.
It's amazing too, I think, the wisdom that we gain through a deep, deep, significant loss when it feels earlier than it should, right? Because obviously losing my mother she was my best friend, and she also was older, and I think that some of those anticipatory deaths that we know are coming, but when someone is taken from us just like that, and I think what it does, if we were all really honest with ourselves, we all know we're going to die, but when a young person dies, it sort of brings, that old cliche that every day is a gift, and it really is a gift.
You never think it's going to happen to you. You never think it's going to happen to you. And it's not until it happens to someone so close to you and it comes to your own front door that you realize how true it is. And again, like, to start with, I was so angry about it and I was so upset, and then I ignored it and I buried it deep, and then it all came out, and it has just been such a process. But I do think I've done quite well with it to get to where I have, and I'm kind of, looking back, I'm kind of pleased with the process.
Yeah, I mean, well, you've done a lot of hard work and it shows. Yeah, so I just want all of our listeners to really hear some of the most powerful things that Aimee has shared today, because give yourself the space and the grace to do the work that you need to do. And I've done a very similar thing, Aimee, since my brother's death. Is, my declaration was, I'm going to try something new each year and just enjoy my life in a different way. I think that it's more special to me, I think, than I realized prior to my brother's death. I have to end with my favorite question about what self-love looks like to you now. Has that changed, the idea of self-love, since your brother's death?
I don't know if it has necessarily changed. I don't think I thought much about it before. I do think that for me now, having been through whatever messy process that was, and just loads of other, whatever else goes on in your life, I think it's, for me, self-love is just realizing that everyone goes through different things and everyone feels differently and everyone reacts to things differently, and that you shouldn't punish yourself for not following the same path. Just because someone else feels one way at a situation doesn't mean that you should feel the same way, and that you shouldn't punish yourself for that. And I think just accepting where you're at and how you deal with things, and accepting yourself for whatever it is at that given time, is just self-love.
Aimee McKee, I love you so much. I always believe that there are these incredible, I'm going to cry now, these incredible gifts that come from the deepest tragedies in our life. And our brothers dying, we were given the gift of each other. And so I just want to honor that right now, that I'm deeply grateful that our brothers brought us together. And I want to thank you for coming and sharing your story. So, Aimee, where can people find you on social media?
My Instagram is Aimee. It's Aimee. My mum said it's French, but there's not a bit of French in us, so I don't know where that came from. AIMEE and then underscore McKee, MCKEE. My Facebook again is just Aimee McKee.
Excellent. We'll have that in the show notes too. Thank you everyone for listening. And I hope this conversation, if you are grieving, has been helpful in really just driving the point home of giving yourself love and grace as you grieve the sibling that you have lost, and love to all of you. Bye for now.